you for the invitation. I was invited to speak because of this very um, wide review that I wrote together with a colleague. It was published in 2020. What we did was I had been working at a unit, at a clinical unit, in which patients come in and they say, we want to check whether there is some connection between our health problems and the medical literature. In the beginning, we saw cancer patients, and then later on we began to see electrohypersensitive patients in the beginning, when it just started, 2007, 8. I think I saw the first maybe in 2009. And then I went on to specialize in anesthesiology, and I worked at the pain clinic. I also opened my own private clinic, not private, a public clinic, a research clinic, and I brought information from 19 patients who came in, and I'll explain why I brought these patients in a minute. But I wanted to say that when I prepared this very wide review, then the manuscript I initially submitted was 80 pages and had more than 500 references. People say all the time that there is not enough science, but there is a lot of science, and people don't listen to it because certain agencies say, no, there's no connection, we don't know, there's no data, but really there is a lot of data. Next slide, please. So this got a lot of attention, the Havana syndrome. In 2020, sometime after my review was published, there was this publication about this very strange event that diplomats in Cuba, they had suddenly they heard loud noises and they had headaches and head pressure and dizziness and tinnitus, and nobody knew what it is, and it's a very, very new syndrome. So I'm bringing here a few references to show that many people have written about this, and it's really not a new syndrome. Next slide, please. The person who wrote the most about this was called Alan Frey. He did a lot of work for the United States Army in the 1970s, even in the 60s, and he published about sounds, about noises that people hear, which are caused by microwaves. And it's very specific about microwaves, and it's exactly the same as these diplomats heard and suffered from. So if you see at the top of this page, people say, oh, you have headaches from cell phones? How can it be? So I just brought a little bit of his paper. On the left is a quote from his paper, and on the right are the previous references of things he wrote about this many years ago. But actually he said, of course it's true. Many people have written about this. There is a lot of information. You're just saying that you don't know because people choose not to read certain parts of the literature. Next slide, please. Next slide. Here is another example. This is a doctor, no, actually the one before, the Moscow embassy in a minute. Never mind. In the slide before, a doctor, an MD, describes the symptoms of some patients he saw. A 50-year-old man was exposed to microwaves. In the beginning, he had a sudden heating sensation and erythema, but later on, he suffered headaches, insomnia, irritability, emotional liability. These are exactly the symptoms that were called the microwave syndrome or microwave disease. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons that we don't know about this and that many agencies say that this isn't important is that things like this have been hidden for many, many years. It's not politically correct to say so, but perhaps it's time to say so. In between 1952 and 1966, the American embassy in Moscow was radiated with low-level electromagnetic signals, which are considered low, up to 18 microwatt per centimeter square. In my opinion, it's very high, but in the opinion of organizations like ICNIL, it's nothing. It's very low. So people were radiated every day from a building alongside. And the Americans discovered this a few years after it began, but they didn't do anything. They said, oh, it's just a low level, let's see what happens. So they allowed their people to be radiated. But after the consul died of leukemia, then they had to go and look into it. There was no hiding it anymore. Next slide, please. One thing that is important about this is that they were very different, the frequencies were different, and it wasn't like a single wave. The modulations of the waves were random and were changing and were complex. So there has been quite a lot of literature about this, which also nobody claims to have ever seen or read. But I happened to read it because the person who wrote it was a professor called John Goldsmith, and his student was my teacher. So I happened to read this. On the right is a table from his paper from 1997, and on the left is a table he made in a book he wrote before he died, which hasn't been published, but it's here and I can share this with whoever wants. So they describe symptoms like depression, irritability, weakness, difficulty concentrating, memory loss. Many of these symptoms are the very exact symptoms that we see today in our patients. Next slide, please. Okay, so my research was actually that my original research was that I took the data of my first patients in the first year who came to my clinic. My clinic was just a public clinic in the hospital. I was not paid for it. I am not funded by anybody or supported by anybody. I just do my work because it interests me. And as you can see on the left, on the top, most of my patients indeed had headaches and migraines. The most interesting symptom they complained of was brain fog, which means that a person tries to find a word, tries to say something, and they know that they know how to say what they want, but the word doesn't come to them. They describe it like there is a cloud inside their head and they cannot find words they want to say. And sometimes it's even worse. People can have this when they're out in the street. If they are in a specific place which they connect this to electromagnetic fields, and after a lot of patients that I've seen, I agree with them that it probably is. So they can get really disoriented. Many of them have sleep difficulties. Many of them become anxious, even up to panic, because they don't know what's happening to them. They become very weak. Some of them have instability, dizziness, falls, nausea. Some of them have earaches and they hear sounds. Some of them describe heart palpitation, tightness in the chest, the muscle cramps, abdominal cramps, joint pain. It's a very wide range of symptoms, but you see that the patients usually don't have all of them. They have like 2 or 3 specific ones for each patient out of all this range, and the patient will have the same symptom every time they're exposed. In a few slides I'll show you how I saw this like in a more clinical setting. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, but the most important thing to see is that the outcomes, it's not that the person wasn't feeling well and they went on with their life. These people stopped their lives. So many of them just stopped using devices that emit EMF because at some stage they understood that their symptoms are coming from these devices, that when they use them, they feel bad. So they stopped using them. And if they were at a place of work or in school where these devices are used, many children were absent from school, many people left their workplace. They just couldn't stay there anymore. So it's not like a small outcome that these people didn't feel well and they had a small pain. No, these people could not continue with their life. And that is what caught me and what made me very interested in this problem. Now, studies have described many other outcomes, but I've just brought this for you to see. I'm not going to talk about this now. Next slide, please. Regarding the mechanisms, I knew I wouldn't have time if I wanted to go into the clinical side, but I did just bring you one. One of them by Husner shows that you cannot really diagnose EHS people with regular MRIs, brain MRIs. They have normal anatomy and you can't see it. But when you do functional MRI, then you see that actually the connections inside their brains are different from other people. They actually have neural damage or their brain has become different. Either that or they were initially different from other people, and when they encountered the microwaves or the electromagnetic radiation that's in the environment, then they behave differently than others. And this has been shown objectively. It's not just the people saying and imagining it. These are real objective findings that have been shown in the pictures. And the other mechanisms are, as many people I think will say now in the meeting, is the overproduction of reactive oxygen species in the cells, and the sensitization of the cells because of repeated exposures. Many of the sensitive people have impaired detoxification systems. Many of them come to actual neural damage. We have a very great scientist today with us. He will explain about his, from Greece, he will explain about his idea that the physical theories that electromagnetic radiation should not really affect people just doesn't work in real life, because man-made electromagnetic radiation is not exactly as the theories say. So theoretically people are not supposed to be affected, but practically and clinically they are affected because the theories just don't work. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is my most important slide, and I'll go over it quickly. This is after I saw my 19 patients that I brought you the symptoms. I saw many more patients because I worked for a year and a half at the pain clinic of the hospital. So these were not patients who came because of EHS. We couldn't say it's nocebo effect. They didn't know anything about electromagnetic radiation. They just came because they have pain. And nobody could help them. Many people told them, like, we don't care, just go to the pain clinic, and they ended up coming to me. And this is what I figured out, that in the beginning, the patient uses the technology and has no idea that this has anything to do with their pain. And then, after they use it a lot, those who are sensitive, and I don't know if they were initially sensitive or they developed it, but many of them develop it, then they develop 1 or 2 or 3 specific symptoms, and whenever they use the technology too much, then they begin to feel this specific pain. At the second worsening stage, they will feel this pain much faster. Perhaps before they could speak for 10 minutes, and then they would get a terrible pain here and an abdominal cramp and forget words. And then they would get it after 2 minutes, and then after 1 minute. And then this patient would just throw away their cell phone and say, this device is causing me pain. They understand it because it hurts them. And and also it's important to know that when they stop using the device, the pain doesn't disappear immediately. When they become sensitive, it can last for hours, it can last for days after they use it. So you can't say that now we turn it on and they respond, then we turn it off, they don't respond. And if they know it's on or off, then it means that they're telling us the truth. The body doesn't work like that. The body doesn't, many of the people don't even know that it has something to do with the electronic devices, and their body responds. I knew it because they came to me, and I had seen like 50 more like them. So I told them, listen, aren't you perhaps exposed to electromagnetic radiation? And then we thought about it. For example, there was a very old Arab man who came to the pain clinic, and he described all electromagnetic symptoms, and he had no idea at all about electromagnetic problems. And I told him, listen, you have an antenna next to your house. He said, no, I don't have anything. I said, where do you live? Oh, I live in an Arab village, and I'm the last house in the village. And what is behind your house? Oh, that's an army base. Yeah, well, an army base doesn't have any antennas, right? So you have nothing to do with electromagnetic. So that's why I'm saying that it's not nocebo, because many of the patients coming to the pain clinic have no idea about electromagnetic radiation. They haven't heard about it, they don't know about it, they love their cell phones, but they suffer pain. So the next stage was that the patient goes into the pit, which means they have symptoms that just don't pass. And the medications, at the pain clinic, we give medications for fibromyalgia, for all sorts of things. They don't work. Nothing works on these patients. The medications don't work at all. They need to go into the bunkers. They have to hide from the exposures. And because they have to hide, then they cannot use public transportation. If they have a smart meter next to their house, they cannot be in their house. They have to go and find some basement somewhere where nobody's living, where they can be for a while until their hypersensitivity sort of relaxes a bit. And it takes weeks or months, and I've seen many of them begin to recover. What helps them is a sort of fine-tuning of the nervous system. They are sort of hyper stressed. Their a sympathetic nervous system works too much, and their parasympathetic nervous system is not functioning. So what they need, what helps them is qigong, is breathing exercises. I know some clinics give GABA, some clinics give melatonin to help them sleep, but regular medications, I have seen very, very few patients that respond to it. And the last thing is that in the long term, they do not get back to like normal behavior levels. They cannot be exposed. They cannot go in the public transport, even after like 2 years after their worsening stage. They can feel much, much better as long as they keep away from some of the exposures. When they're exposed, they can be exposed for a short while, and then they need to recuperate for a few days, a week, and then they're okay. They don't have pain all the time. But if you are exposed, these people, all the time to a smart meter, this person will want to commit suicide from pain. And I've seen them. They really need an environment that they can be not exposed. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just showing how these people cannot hide because it's everywhere. Last slide, please. The last slide, I just wanted to say one thing, that you cannot base safety standards on averages. The body, the biology does not recognize the average. It's like you hit someone's arm 5 times with a hammer. Then in average it doesn't hurt them, but actually it hurts them a lot for a short while, and part of the time it doesn't hurt them. You cannot average this. And the signals, the modulation of the signals changes all the time, and the biological cells respond to many different things, and you cannot just average and say, oh, in this number it's okay. it's not okay. The biology doesn't work like that. That's it. Thank you very much, and sorry I took longer than expected.